Hi, I'm Dave Merlino.
I'm Dustin Sweet, and this is the Know Their Story podcast. We talk to veterans about their time in service, returning home from war, and transitioning out of the military. Hopefully along the way we'll inspire you to do the same with a veteran in your life.
Because sometimes all it takes to make the world a better place is sitting down with a friend to know their story.
I'm always wondering if I should click leave meeting as soon as it tells me.
Well, that's the type of confidence I like in my co-host right there. Heading into season 4 of the Know Their Story podcast. It's been a couple weeks since we've been on the air. Welcome back, Mr. Dustin.
Welcome back, Mr. Dave. It's good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in months.
Yeah, because you live in New Mexico and I live in Washington.
It's amazing.
Hopefully we'll be joining up soon on the film festival circuit.
Yeah, we have that to look forward to.
Which, if you're deducing this audience, that means that yes, Apache Blues Welcome Home, the documentary, is complete, and we actually have a tie-in today on our episode for that. Like I said, it's been a couple weeks. It's been a while since we went. We were just talking before we hit record. I got long COVID, and every time I talked, I coughed, and that made it hard to host something that is in the talking medium. And then I got my hip replaced. They did not give me the bionic one that I asked for, but yeah, my kids want me to run Bloomsday next week here in Spokane.
Yeah.
I had to tell them
for it.
It's a 1-year recovery. That's what I keep saying. 1-year recovery.
Oh man, they're gonna make you do it with them next year.
Yeah, I put it off last year because I hadn't had the hip replaced, and then this year it's like, oh no, I'm recovering. I mean, they play soccer and all that. Like I can go keep up with that. So, but yeah, no, actually, I did go to run the other day, and there's no power, no explosive power.
None.
Yeah. The therapist said that the muscles haven't been used in a long time because my hip was not working. So that'll get me out of Bloomsday. But thank you for being here. As I said, very special. It's start of season 4. Special because our guest today actually appears in Apache Blues Welcome Home. And it's funny, in the first email I sent setting this episode up, I mentioned I feel like I know our guest very well from having spent all the time editing the movie and listening to everything. And this is actually the very first time we've spoken in person, because Dustin ran this interview in Taos, New Mexico.
True.
So this is a fun little thing for me, having heard your voice in my headphones for all these years. But today's guest was a medevac pilot in a little country in conflict called Vietnam. Did 2 separate tours. First one starting January 1st, 1969. Happy New Year. We have all expenses paid trip for you. Yep. Working out of Phuc Vinh, Tay Ninh. I mentioned those 2 because he was stationed literally at the same time as some of the guys in our movie, at the same place. Probably flew with some of them without knowing 50 years later you'd be in a movie together. But you were shot down. They pulled you out of the field, put some duct tape, some Bondo on you. Went to be a instructor pilot in Georgia for a while, and then volunteered to go back to Vietnam in the winter of 1971. Retired from the U.S. Army and was a contractor with a small private company called NASA. But please welcome today. I've got to do 2 titles here because you are a retired colonel, but also Father Mike Olsen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Dustin, I'm going to let you take over because you have the special connection of how Father Olsen is in our movie.
It's always good to see you, Mike.
Good to see you, Dustin.
Thanks for agreeing to do this podcast with us, and thanks for sitting down with me for the movie. It was I think it was in the parish hall that I saw the 19 Air Cav badge on your lapel. And chatted you up about it. It's been a fun piece to this whole thing. My standard question, to get things started is, how did you end up working for the United States Army?
Well, I ran away from Wyoming. That's a good thing to do. My wife Sandy and I got married in high school and tried some odd jobs, being an EMT, driving an ambulance in Wyoming, when she decided that she was going to get pregnant. And of course, being a 18, 19-year-old kid without medical insurance and with no place to go, the Army looked like a really good place to run away to.
How was basic, and how did you find yourself piloting helicopters?
I went through basic in Missouri in the middle of the winter, and it's really cold there in winter. From there, I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, into 82nd Airborne, and decided that being a falling out of perfectly good airplanes and being a ground pounder pushing through the bush was not what I was called to do. So I applied for flight school and was accepted, and went off as a warrant officer candidate to Fort Walter, Texas.
Yeah.
And ultimately graduated from Fort Walters and then Hunter Army Airfield, and then went to medevac school en route back to to Vietnam.
What was the big difference between going to medevac school? Like, had you already been flying Hueys at that point?
Well, coming right out of flight school, I had, of course, we trained in Hueys in Georgia.
Right.
So went from there to medevac school. The Army in those days, and maybe still does, had a rule that a medically trained officer had to authorize the breaking of the skin by our medics. So they foolishly sent us to a school in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, to try to train us to do something. I've never figured that out. I've never figured out how they expected me to fly the aircraft and pay attention to what was going on in the back. And of course, the medic and my crew chief back there were far more talented at taking care of people than I was. My job was just to get from point A to point B.
Well, and that actually, a question. I read the book Dead Man Flying by General Brady, who was a dust-off pilot
Yep.
at the very, very start of the war.
Yep.
Very like Wild West. They didn't know what to do with it. Is for you as a medevac pilot, it's never quite clear to me, what are the differences, or is there, between dust off and medevac? Is that two names for the same thing, or are those two separate entities?
In reality, it's two names for the same thing. Medevac was assigned either to the 1st Cav Division or 101st Airborne.
Okay.
Dust off was assigned to the 44th Medical Brigade. So we were in allegedly combat units, and they were in medical units, but that's the only difference.
And what struck me is, I don't know, I mean, your first tour, 69, he said they had a lot of problems in that the commanders, at least at the start of the war, were World War II and Korea veterans, and the helicopter was so new, they had trouble convincing people, like, we don't need to stage our wounded. I can fly them right to the hospital,
right,
and stay in the golden hour. Was that still kind of a conflict for you by 69, or things?
No, there wasn't much of a conflict. That was well accepted. And of course, the survival rate significantly improved when we started moving people to the hospitals and battalion aid stations as quickly as we could. Not too much argument, because the results proved themselves pretty quickly.
What was a normal day like that first tour?
A normal, well, you couldn't really say there was a normal day, because we were on call all the time. We had in in the first cav in the medevac unit, we had a first up bird at Phuc Vinh, another first up at Quan Loy, and a first up at Tay Ninh. So we had 3 birds active. Then at Phuc Vinh, we would have a second up bird. And if you were assigned as first up, you were on duty for 24 hours. Hopefully you can get some sleep. My longest duty day was 28 hours.
Wow.
On that particular day during TET of 69, I did not get out of the aircraft's seat for 28 hours, but I got out long enough to get rid of excess water and right back in. But most days you were just sitting, waiting to be called. We had, of course, already prepared the aircraft. They were ready to go. We could, once the alarm bells went off, or actually it was a horn, when it went off, we prided ourselves on being fired up and pulling pitch within 2 minutes.
Wow, that's fast.
Because, well, somebody was dying out there.
Yeah.
Or we wouldn't have been called.
Well, and that leads me to the actually next question that was rattling around in my head. I mean, I know technically speaking, with the big red cross painted on the side of your helicopter, no one shot at you, although I already gave away that you were shot down once. If you're being called out, someone has been shot, even though sometimes they would probably tell you, no, there's no enemy in the area. It's, well, how did someone get shot?
Yeah.
But what is, I mean, you're pulling into most likely an active fight. Like, how is your mindset pulling into that to kind of get that helicopter in and out and do that?
Well, you have to remember that most of us were 19 or 20-year-old kids with 1,600 horsepower. We didn't think about it very much. We knew somebody needed us. We were ready to go. At least in the medevac unit, we had a well accepted, I'll call it a rule, it wasn't that, an agreement that if you didn't want to go, somebody else would go. And if you no longer could take the mission, they would very quickly transfer you out to a less, I almost said less dangerous, it probably wasn't that, but a less likely to be shot at every day unit. So, you know, we took pride in each other because we knew with that unwritten rule that if we didn't go, the number 2 was going to go. And we all had too much pride to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like the volunteer versus voluntold joke before we turned on the recording. Someone's got to go.
Yeah, somebody's going to go. Somebody needs you. As you mentioned, very often when the mission calls would come in, you would hear, I've got 3 wounded, and they would describe the wounds, no enemy contact for the last 24 hours. And so your question always was, did you shoot him? But the ground guys were so concerned that we would not come if they mentioned that there was enemy, when all we wanted to do is know which way the enemy was, so that we didn't overfly them or do something really stupid, try to stop at the wrong place.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you could pick your path in depending on where the enemy was. So,
what's the difference between like landing areas? Did you have a real sense of, you know, elephant grass versus the side of a hill versus flat rice paddy, or
you never knew. Up in the Tay Ninh area and north of Quan Loy to the Song Bay area was pretty mountainous.
Yeah.
So jungle or tall trees and mountains, you just didn't know. we had several aircraft that were equipped with hoists. So if it was real tall jungle, we could drop a jungle penetrator down, which is always exciting. You know, you're hovering at 120 feet above the trees with a cable and
Yeah, you throw an anchor
down
off,
through the
basically,
trees.
right?
And your medic and your crew chief were standing, you know, talking to you full time, forward 2 inches, back, go left, go right, penetrators on the ground, patients coming up. And so you were just standing there, and you made a really good target because you couldn't move without dragging that guy through the trees. Not something you want to do. The hoist had emergency cable cutters on them, so that if you got hung up, you could cut the cable very quickly. But you always remember there was somebody on the end of that.
Yeah.
So thank God I never had to cut a cable.
No, what a choice.
But I did drag a couple guys through the trees, I suspect, a few times.
That's what happened on the CBS video for Craig Jorgensen. You know, they were getting shot at and they had to veer and it dragged them through the trees.
Mm-hmm.
But got them out.
Yep.
So we mentioned a couple times now being shot down. Could you walk us through those events? Like what memory stand is that all clear as day to you, or what happened that day?
Not really that clear. A lot of it's been suppressed. I was shot up several times, brought lots of aircraft home with air conditioning in them. But this particular time, it was a mission up on the Cambodian border north of Quan Loy in the Song Bay area. And it was a special forces outfit with primarily Cambodians.
Wow.
But with American advisors, and they had a lot of wounded. So we actually sent 2 aircraft out. One of them was hoist equipped. The one I was flying was not. And we were making multiple trips in. He had made a trip in. I followed him in, and then we took him back to a holding area to where the medics could treat, and we could get right back in to get the others out. My second trip out, I stupidly flew the same direction out that I had gone the first time, and had given them the bad guys time to set up a quad 50 machine gun. And so I low leveled right across a quad 50, and he just started at my nose and stitched back the whole aircraft. I lost oil pressure both in the transmission and in the engine. Flew on for maybe, seemed like an eternity, but probably was a minute or less when the engine failed. And we auto-rotated into the jungle and crashed through about 100-foot jungle canopy. Fortunately, as it turned out, I was the worst hurt on the aircraft, but I didn't know it.
Wow.
And as I mentioned, the second aircraft was hoist equipped. So as I started going down, I didn't need the radio because I think everybody in the whole wide world could hear me yelling Mayday and medevac 2-4 going down. So within moments of us hitting the ground, he was on top and starting to hoist people out. I set up a perimeter with my mechanic, and we had gunners on the medevac birds. And the medic was taking care of the wounded that we already had. They hoisted everybody out. I was the last to go out, and not knowing that I was hurt, quite frankly. Got on the floor of the medevac bird, and the medic said, "Are you hurt?" And I just collapsed. That was it. That literally the last thing I remember until I ended up in the hospital at Long Binh. And from there, a long trip to Japan, and then another long trip back to Fort Carson, Colorado, where I spent quite a few weeks in the hospital. But just the adrenaline didn't really feel anything until I didn't need to feel anything, and then it was done.
Wow.
Yeah, all the thoughts. I mean, did you see it before they fired upon you, or I mean,
No, you could hear it, but I did not see them at all. And then since we were in the mountainous and the jungle, there was no place to sit down. Had there been a decent clearing, then I would hope I would have been wise enough to set it down, but there was no option to make that decision.
and gravity was going to choose where you were going to go.
Exactly. Just hoping that the engine would run long enough to get me to a friendlier area.
Yeah. How fast can you go when the engine's failing like that? How far away did you get?
Oh, when the engine's failing, it wasn't very far.
Yeah, a couple 100 yards, couple like quarter mile.
Yeah, you're flying at 90 or 100 knots.
Yeah.
So, you may have got 2 or 3 miles.
Wow. That's not bad.
No.
In terms of getting away from the guys with the guns, that's 2 or 3 miles is okay.
Exactly.
Every foot counts.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, when you're brought down by someone who doesn't like you, you know.
What was the rehab process like? Was it just doing physical therapy in Colorado and working back up to a place where you felt?
Yeah, it was, well, of course, physical therapy, and they had to put my leg back together.
Yeah, it's everybody's favorite time.
Yeah. So a long time in braces and casts and in traction, as they allowed the leg to heal to be even before they could get me up to do much therapy.
Right. So so then my question becomes, what was it like getting back into the pilot seat with your leg?
That's all I wanted to do. They tried to convince me to take a medical retirement because of the wounds, and
Sure.
that I would not be medically qualified to fly. And so I asked for a medical board so that I could prove that I could do what I needed to do to fly. That's all I ever wanted to do.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, and that, we talk about physical therapy, but when we're talking about sending someone back to a war where they've been shot at, they've been shot down, I know nowadays they recognize more of the mental aspects. Was there any mental therapy or any type of work on that, or is just
No, not at all. I'm sure it was available, but we didn't have language for that. And the soldier's mentality is, I just get over it.
Sure.
It's no big thing. So unfortunately, what happened to many of us is we came home and took that anger and that fear out on our families, because you couldn't do it in the unit. There was, I don't know if it was fact or myth, I choose to believe it was myth, that if you asked or were referred to a psychiatric or a psychologist, that your career would be over. So you just didn't do that. And I'm sure it was the families that took the brunt of that frustration and fear.
Yeah, I mean, that myth, I hope it's myth, maybe it's not. I mean, that thinking still permeates. I mean, I worked for Customs and Border Protection, I worked for the government. That thinking still permeates law enforcement. If I get medications that would actually help me and make me do my job better, my career will probably be over.
Right.
So people choose not. Yeah, and it's just it's such
Absolutely.
it's a spiral.
Mhm.
So
What was the medical board like? Did you just have to prove that you could fly, or did
I
they?
had to prove that I had the physical ability to manipulate the controls. And of course, they were so desperate for stupid young men to go back to Vietnam and fly helicopters.
So it was like a ride along with somebody, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, it didn't take a lot of convincing.
Oh man.
you look good to me.
Yeah,
So did you go back to the same unit, or did you? How did you
No.
rotate in?
no, I volunteered to go back and fly medevac the second time. I was by then I had taken a direct commission.
Oh, okay.
And so they sent me back to First Signal Brigade to fly ash and trash to radio outposts, communications outposts.
Right. And is that what you're doing when you got shot down again?
Yeah,
They really helped you.
yeah,
That's real.
exactly.
Good looking out, everybody.
It's one of those safe assignments.
Well, was there some of that worry? Because I've talked with Craig Jorgensen about it. We mentioned he was one of the ones medevaced out. He was, before he joined Apache Troop, he was alert
Mhm.
Ranger long range reconnaissance patrol for people not familiar with that. And his 4-man team got devastated one day. Only 2 survivors. He was one of them, and they wanted to just have him drive a Jeep for an officer for the rest of the war because they feared that you take a 19-year-old kid, teach him you're invincible, go out and kick ass, and now they get a very hands-on upfront view that I'm not invincible.
Right.
And there's the worry was, do you think that was some of the thinking of why you didn't get to go back to medevac and they had you going to outposts? Or
I don't know. There's still a lot of competition between the different branches in the Army.
Yeah.
And Signal Corps, which is what I accepted the direct commission in, just didn't want to let a signal officer go to a medical outfit or
Right.
some other outfit. And of course, they had their own needs, so they decided to keep me.
How many flight days did you get before you got shot down again?
I came home in under 2 months. It wasn't a lot.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Did
I jokingly say if you don't like a place, you don't stay.
you don't stay?
they're kind of sending signals.
Oh,
Maybe.
that's great.
Well,
did-
just
Go ahead, go
when
ahead.
you're talking about competition between even inside the Army, obviously we know that the branches have competition.
Oh, sure.
I can say without a doubt that that in no way permeates into, us and customs never made fun of the FBI or reminded them of their jurisdiction when they
Yeah.
were, it doesn't happen at all anymore.
Oh, no, definitely not.
I would never make fun of the FBI ever
Oh man.
on camera.
What
Yeah.
the question I had about the Signal Corps job was, in the movies, it's always pretty easy for somebody to hitch a lift with a Huey pilot going back some other direction.
Mhm.
Was that real at all? And
Oh,
if so,
no,
was
that-
it just because you're going, so jump in?
Yep. As long as you had room, and by and large, in the Huey, you could throw about anything you wanted in.
Yeah, they're pretty
So
big.
people would just hang around the heliports and the airfields and say, hey, I need to go to such and such a place. Can you give me a lift? And the answer was normally always sure. Climb
Cool.
aboard.
Going there anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Or go in that direction.
Sure.
And most of us just wanted to go fly anyway. So
You're not paying for fuel or
yeah.
perfect. Oh man.
I have a quick question, one that we asked everyone in the movie. And I want to figure out how I have to go back in time, how I asked this. There was definitely a pattern that emerged to this question, and I won't say it until afterwards, but as a pilot, we asked the pilots and we asked the blues, the guys on the ground, who, as a pilot, who do you think had the more dangerous job, the pilots or the guys on the ground?
Oh, the guys on the ground, without question. I got to go back to a base camp on night and wait until I got called out. They had to hang out there in those nasty dark jungles. No, I'm going home.
Without
It's
fail,
10 for 10.
without fail, every pilot said the infantry had the more dangerous job, and everyone on the blue said the pilots had the more dangerous job. Because for their view, they could hide behind a tree, but clouds didn't really stop bullets. And all the pilots said, "Ooh, they're shooting. I'm gonna get on out of here."
Yeah. Yep.
So nice. Yeah, but the pattern continues.
So the second time you got shot down, did you get hurt that time as well?
Yeah. Well, what happened is when they had put my leg back together, it failed.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't really injured in a crash or anything, just
Sure.
the vibration of flying probably too much.
Yeah.
Just caused it to fall apart again. So I came home to more surgeries, and the second time actually they had to take my ankle out and just fuse everything.
So the second time you came back to the States, did you have kids already?
Oh yeah.
So
That's
how old
why
were
you
your
joined,
kids when you
remember?
came back?
Say what?
How old were your children when you came back from your second tour?
Oh, Jeff. I got to think about that. Kevin wasn't born yet. Jeff was
Okay.
probably 2.
Okay.
I remember the first time they wheeled me into the hospital at Fort Carson on a litter. Sandy and Jeff were there, and Sandy said, "There's Daddy," and Jeff ran right up and hugged the doctor.
That's great.
Nice. And you're like, "Well, welcome home."
Welcome.
Yeah,
home.
exactly.
That's real nice, right there.
Yeah, daddies weren't supposed to be lying down on a stretcher,
On a stretcher,
I
right?
guess.
Oh man. So how did you end out the rest of your commission then?
I continued to fly on and off for about 10 years. I do a ground assignment and then an aviation assignment. You know, I commanded a signal company in Germany, and then went to Army Aviation Command and was an assistant program manager of Special Electronic Mission Aircraft, responsible for developing a new radar to hang on the Army's Mohawk.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was primarily staff and ground commands, mostly in Europe or the Pentagon.
When you put together one of the first male-female units, right?
I did. Well, the first consolidated, integrated, I guess.
Integrated. There it is.
Barracks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was in 123rd Signal Battalion in Würzburg, Germany. And the women, we had quite a few women assigned to our units, but they were kept in what we called the whack shack. And I thought, you know, I'm taking all of these people to the field. They're living in tents together. Why in the hell can't they live together in the barracks?
Sure.
Got my battalion commander's permission to bring them into the barracks. And of course, there were some logistics issues.
Sure.
Of which bathroom, how do you do those kinds of things?
Sure.
But just no issue.
Rad.
We were willing to put a gun in their hand, but we weren't willing to believe we could trust them with the opposite sex. And that just so silly. So stupid.
Yeah, and I'm sure no one grumbled at all about that.
Yeah.
Well, it's one thing keeping the rack clean for inspection, but keeping it clean all the time is a real pain in my butt. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask about, and so you go over to Vietnam, shot down, get through the medical board, get yourself back up to go back 2 months later, shot down again, coming home. Besides the whole part of your son running up and hugging the doctor instead of you, just your mental, what was your mental aspect, just knowing like I'm done with the I'm done with the war, the war's done with me. What is that like for you coming up? Because that's what we're trying to convey with, for other veterans that may be
Sure.
listening and hoping they say, oh, I hear that too.
Yeah. I'm not sure I ever realized that I was done. But my second time in the hospital while I was recuperating and getting the surgeries and such, the war started winding down. So I didn't really have to think about it. But I think about it today, that I wish I would not have been wounded, not because of wounded, but because of those young men that were out on the battlefield that needed somebody like me to go get them.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt a little guilty, probably, that I was able to come home when I was supposed to be over there taking care of them.
Yeah, survivor's guilt's a real thing that a lot of guys are able to talk about after a while of thinking about it.
Yeah.
It definitely takes some time.
And that is my question. 50 years removed, we got guys coming home literally right now,
Yeah.
probably today even, who are facing that with your 50 years of experience. And obviously you've had a spiritual life. Have there been things that have helped you to think about that, or what kind of advice do you have? Like, what has helped you that you think may help others?
What I've learned, probably too late, is that we need to have somebody that we trust, that we can sit down and share and say, oh crap, that was really shitty, or my best friend, or the guy that was right next to me. I watched as his vehicle was blown up with an IED, and lost his leg or lost his life or her life now.
Yeah.
We need to have some place that we can go with somebody who understands, somebody who has been through it, somebody who will not judge, but just be your companion, be that shoulder to give you that big hug. And as Justin knows, I'm a hugger.
It's true.
Because I needed it. And we all need it. We need human contact. It's when we bind all of that pain and frustration up, is when we start to get sick. If we can share it, the burden gets less. It doesn't go away, but it gets less. So you need a trusted companion. And by and large, it cannot be your family.
Yeah.
They've got their own burden that they're trying to deal with. So you need to find that person, whether it's a professional or minister, or just the guy down the street that you feel really comfortable with.
Yeah, and when you mentioned family, that's been the conundrum that we've seen when we talked with Dr. Clymer, who used to work at Walter Reed, and he said it's hard for soldiers because they've gone to war to protect their family. Like, I will take this burden, and the last thing they feel like is coming home being like, okay, let me tell you about all this stuff that I didn't want you to have to see. And so that creates a wall. And I agree that there is spouses, whether it be wives and now husbands who stay at home, like they have a lot to work through too.
Absolutely.
But there has to be some at least bridging. Like, it can't be a finite wall in a marriage,
No.
especially. But we did talk to a lot of people, and they're like, oh, I can only talk to veterans. And finally I looked at one of them and I said, really? Because this is the third time we've talked and I wasn't in the military. He's like, oh, well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It can be anyone that you trust. It can be a
Mhm.
friend. It can be someone you met at the bar and you're drinking with that night, and it just feels right. Like,
Yep.
and what I've learned is, you don't have to solve any problems. You just have to listen.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You just need to be the companion, that shoulder that somebody can lean on for that moment.
Yeah.
And you're right. You cannot wall your family completely off. They must have the opportunity to share some of that pain,
Mm,
but you can't offload it on them.
right.
Yeah. It's a tough dance, but
Mhm.
it's better to do the dance than to not do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we've learned talking to so many Vietnam veterans who've had this 50 years worth of experience, and being able to tell veterans now, either this is what helped or I wish I'd done this sooner.
Yeah,
You can do this sooner.
yeah.
Well-
You need to do it sooner.
My question was, how did you notice it influence your relationship with your children, and what would you have done differently?
I was so into myself
Yeah.
and into my career that my kids were, I guess, really cut out of my life.
Hmm.
They were supposed to be the good kids and do, the Army officers' kids and do the right things. But I was not involved with them. And so when our first grandson was born, I was in the Army War College, actually, and flew out to Wyoming to meet Cody, our first grandson. And as I held him for the first time in the hospital, I realized that I didn't have a clue who my own kids were. And I vowed to him on that day that I would never neglect or abandon him the way I had done his father and his uncle.
Hmm.
And that began a transition in my life.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Several years later, I retired from the Army, I guess 3 years later. But it just completely changed my life when I woke up to the fact that I had been so selfish
Hmm.
and had the perfect family, and they were expected to be the perfect family, but I wasn't involved in them at all.
Hmm.
Did that lead to some talking with your sons then, or?
It did. Unfortunately, our oldest son, I think, paid the price by not having a father around. He struggled with drugs and ultimately died from liver disease. That clearly was caused by his drug use through the years. And it took a very long time for us to reconcile. But when we did, he suddenly didn't need the drugs anymore.
Wow.
It's good. Sorry, my wife and kids are blowing up my phone. Nope, don't need to deal with that. I'm gonna give an aside, lighten the mood for a second. My daughters, I have twin daughters who are 16,
Oh,
recently licensed. And I have to say, as the guy who used to get up at 6 a.m. to drive them to school every day and to drive them to all their sports and choir, fantastic. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. As the person financially responsible for them, not so much. But one of my daughters came and said, "Oh, my friend has a tennis match. Can I go?" And I thought her sister's soccer practice was canceled, so she could take the car. I'm like, "Yeah, no problem. Go." So her sister was like, "No, it's just regular cancel. I still have goalie practice. I need the car." And so now I have three options. As fathers, you can tell me which one is the worst of the bad. I can be a jerk and say, "Okay, you can't go anymore." I can go watch 2 hours of boys tennis of no one that I know on a cold day, or I can give my daughter my brand new less than 10,000 miles Ford Expedition Max to drive to school.
Mhm.
I
Wow,
chose
it's gonna be cold.
the third one.
Yeah.
So I'm on the phone with Docdale Valley, one of the guys in the movie, and I said, "Oh boy, I gotta go." It's like, why? I was like, "My daughter's calling me and she's got my car. I think I need to take it." And yeah, freaking out. "Oh my God, I backed into someone and I'm gonna lose my life." Oh, and I'm like, "Calm down. It's just, it is what it is." Was it just like, "The other car is so bad. I was trying to straighten." I was like, "How's my car?" She's like, "Your car's fine." That doesn't seem right, but okay. It's like, "Send me a picture." So she sends me the picture of the other car, and I'm like, I'm not seeing it. Like, what am I looking at here? I don't see any damage. She's like, "It's right there." And she's like, "I'll circle it." And she sends it back, circles it. I'm like, I'm still not seeing anything. She's like, "Is it an ugly car?" I'm like, "Well, it's a Mercury, but so yeah, but." And she's like, "No, it's right there." And then suddenly she's like, "Wait, that line's on. Oh, that's where the hood meets the grill. Oh, everything's fine. All right, see you, Dad."
Yeah.
So
Man.
yeah. So that is why when my phone starts blowing up nowadays, when the kids are out with the car, I'm like, "I better look at this.
Yeah,
I
pay
don't
attention.
need to deal with it." So but a little lighthearted moment. We learned that from Randall Wallace. When you have a down moment, you need to tell a joke. No.
Mhm.
So I mentioned at the start, we had two titles. I could say Father Colonel Mike Olsen or Colonel Father Mike Olsen. Um, how did you find your way to the church?
Well, starting with the grandson.
Hmm.
You know, we had always been church goers because that's what was expected of an up and coming Army officer or Army family.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I ever believed an awful lot of it, or that it. Well, I guess a little of it sunk in over the years. But when I really had to start reflecting on my life and how I felt it needed to change, then church became the community,
Yeah.
not the church, but the community of church goers became a lot more important to me. And so I started to get more and more involved, volunteering and working on feeding programs and those kinds of things. And it just fed me. Where one little step, then I started mentoring a program out of the University of the South called Education for Ministry. Well, I started as a student in it and then became a mentor. And in California was close enough to a seminary that I thought, oh, I'll go take an Old Testament course, which will make me a better mentor.
Hmm.
And then, that was a pretty good course. I like that. Let me go take the New Testament course. And ultimately, that continued to develop, where the priest in the church we were attending, where I was, what in the Episcopal Church was the senior warden, and most other churches would be on the church board. And the priest came to me and said, you've been in seminary now for over a year, part-time. Have you ever thought about entering the priesthood? And my answer to him and to other people before that was, hell no, not me. I'm a soldier.
Mm.
And I don't know when I ever said yes, but I quit saying no.
Well, and one of the guys we talked to said he would talk to the pastor all the time in Vietnam, and really is like, his attitude at the time was, look around. How can you be talking to me about God
Mhm.
when I'm getting in gunfights almost, every week? Was there any moment, I don't want to call it a reckoning or like, for what you've seen, like, was there a moment where you had to think about that? Or
There were a lot of moments where I had to think about that. And flying out with some wounded in the back with a guy bleeding out. The question is, God, where the hell are you? Why is this guy going to die on my airplane and get blood all over it as well? Where the hell are you? Why are you allowing this to happen? And so through the years, I had to start trying to answer that question rather than just to ask it.
Mm.
And I don't have a great answer, but I'm convinced God is there, and God damned us with free choice.
Yeah.
So it's not God, it's us that are really screwing the world up. And I have this image in my mind of God up there, or Jesus up there, looking down over all of us with tears streaming down his cheeks, saying, why didn't they learn? Why didn't they listen?
and will they ever?
Will they ever? Exactly.
Yeah.
And so,
Free choice. Free choice is a gift and a curse.
yeah, it's clearly a curse. So that, and that pushed me into this business even more, where I do a fair amount of pastoral counseling. I'm also a spiritual director and walk with people on their journeys of life, through some really horrible things and through some wonderful things.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of too what we're looking at. Like, you have a line in the movie that, soldiers are taught to be, I'm paraphrasing, soldiers are taught to be independent, and it's up to us to reach out to them, and it's up to us to try and offer them that support. I'm trying to figure out how to ask this as open-ended as I can without trying to influence. I'm not trying to, but I don't want to accidentally influence the question. And obviously each parish, each church, each denomination is slightly different.
Mhm.
How can the church, and I'm using that as a broad term,
Right.
help veterans? Like, do you think that there's room to do more, or, how can this fit together?
I think there's room to do a lot more.
Mm.
We need to be open to the veterans, and we're not.
Yeah.
We need to invite them in, but more importantly, we need to walk out the doors of the church to where they are.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's more of a question to the church community rather than the church itself.
Yeah,
The church as an institution is like a solid business, but then
Yeah.
the people who it's serving, how can we, it comes back to that question, how can I serve?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I think too, I can see how there could be a fear. Let's say if someone who hasn't been religious and wants to talk, and they're thinking about talking to their local priest,
Yeah,
and a worry that, I want someone to talk to, but I don't need a lecture on the Bible, let's say.
exactly.
Yeah, but having, being in your position, what would you tell someone, in Taos? And we'll even go directly if it's in Taos, if they wanted to come, that, it's just someone to talk to.
Mhm. Just call me, stop me on the street, stop me in the coffee shop. I will listen. I'm working right now with middle-aged man in Los Angeles who is on the sheriff's department and going through some of these things. He was a member of the special victims unit in Compton.
Wow.
Is a pretty tough place.
Yeah.
And he just needs somebody to be with him. Yes, I was a police chaplain out there, so I have a bit of understanding of what he's going through, but I don't really need to understand. I need to be present and to listen.
And special victims is a tough assignment with, being stationed in Seattle for customs. We had a lot of Southeast Asia connections.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but we do see a certain type of crime come back. And I worked very closely with the child porn unit, set up some operations, and of all the arrests I have, the ones that stick with me are the child molesters.
Yeah.
It's a pretty effed up thing.
Yeah. Yeah, sure it is.
Yeah, and it is, you don't have to be in a gunfight to need to talk to someone for what you've seen.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what we want to get across too. We'll talk to veterans and they'll say, "Oh, I wasn't infantry." It's like,
Yeah.
you were over there. Like, you knew people who went out one day and didn't come back. Like, this affects you, and it's okay to talk about this. So that's what we try to get across.
I've spent a fair amount of time with World War II veterans, usually at their end of life. And it's only when they're really looking at their death that they give themselves permission to share those stories. And we can't let our generation, the Vietnam vets, the cops that are on the street now, or the fireman who is pulling a body out of a wreck, we can't force them to wait until the end of life to have somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like we keep saying, learn from the 50 years of experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dustin, I feel like I've monopolized the last few minutes.
Oh, it's how you operate. It's fine. I'm used to it. No,
Thank you.
I'm interested in changing the pace a little bit. I want to know how influenced you were by President Kennedy's speech to work with NASA.
Not an awful lot.
Wow.
When I retired from the Pentagon, Sandy and I jumped on a 35-foot sailboat and were running away to live happily ever after in t-shirts and cutoffs in the Caribbean. And
worked really well.
Yeah.
You missed a little bit, buddy.
Yeah. Well, someplace off the coast of North Carolina as we were going south, we both realized that having two type A personalities on a very small sailboat was not going to make for longevity of life or marriage. Somebody was going to go overboard. And about that time, a major general who I'd worked for in the Pentagon had gone to work supporting NASA. And a damn cell phone worked, and he called and said, "Hey, I want you to come to Marshall Space Flight Center. I've got a job for you." And I said, "Dave, I'm retired. I'm not working anymore." He said, "Well, come over and spend the weekend." So we pulled into West Palm Beach, Florida, flew to Huntsville. It was a long weekend. I don't remember which one. And we wined and dined, and he showed me what they were doing. And come Tuesday, I was in the store buying a damn sport coat and a tie so I could go to work.
He said, "Let me introduce you to the concept we call double dipping."
Yeah.
You're retired and you get a contractor salary, but only have to work for it.
Yeah.
Oh man. So did you sell the boat, or did you?
No, we kept that one for quite a while. Ultimately, when I transferred to the West Coast to the Jet
Right.
Propulsion Lab, we shipped that boat west and we sold it out there, but we traded it in on a bigger boat and then lived for 12 years on a sailboat on the West Coast.
Right, because that's what you were doing when we recruited you up here.
Yep, yep.
Not sailing too much in New Mexico though.
Actually, we went down and California's tax rules were such that if you bought a boat outside the state, so when we signed the sales slip, we were 3 miles offshore, so we were outside in international waters, and then took it to Mexico for 6 months. And so if you bought it outside the state and it didn't come into the States for the first 6 months, you didn't have to pay sales tax.
Wow.
So we stayed on our old boat and went down to Mexico almost every weekend to stay on the new boat and learn about it and sail it around Mexico.
Viva Mexico.
Yeah.
Oh, nice move.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. As someone who grew up in a small business family, you pay the least amount of taxes.
Yeah, you're darn right.
But you pay your taxes, but don't.
You get real excited about it, like
Yeah, you don't need to pay extra.
Yeah. They don't thank you, surprisingly.
Yeah.
we're all in this together,
Yeah.
sort of. What's been the biggest change in the course of your life over the course of your retirement from the military to becoming a full-time civilian? What is the piece that you've noticed the most, the biggest change in your own schedule and your own day-to-day living?
Well, I think that the biggest change is the camaraderie you had in a unit in the military.
Yeah.
You had an extended family. You were with them literally every day and most evenings, and you don't have that in civilian life. And that's been a challenge, I think, for me, of trying to establish that community.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for a lot of people. I think the especially because we don't talk about it, right? So you have this big lack of community. It's the closest thing I have is tight sports teams where you have this group of men who are doing a thing together, and then
And women.
and then afterwards but you have this tight group of people, right? It doesn't matter gender, just that you're all working towards a common goal. Right. And getting to know each other slightly, not real in depth, except for 4 or 5 people, but slightly. And because of the commonality of your goal, you end up really tight knit.
Well, I noticed in working for NASA, I had really good teams that I was working with, but come 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they all went their own way. The military, that wasn't certainly the military overseas.
Right.
You all went the same way, and so you just didn't have the close knit relationships that I saw in the military. And of course, as clergy, that gets even worse because you've got this this boundary that people tend, you put on the funny collar, and people tend to want to put you up on a pedestal and keep you far, far away.
Right.
They'll come to you when they need you, but not friends. That's my priest. That's not my friend. And so I've had to work through that feeling of isolation.
What would you say has been your best tool in navigating that feeling of isolation?
Just being open. And approaching people literally with open arms.
Yeah.
And welcoming them into my personal space.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit ago about hunting for communities and creating communities. What's the best what's the best resource you've found for creating communities, finding other like-minded people to engage forward? Like, have you used the internet a bunch to do that, or what's, I guess my question is like, what's your experience starting communities? Because, you know, Dave, you won't know this, but Mike's a powerhouse Mike, you might not know this. You're a powerhouse in terms of creating community within the larger community of Taos, but also within the diocese of the Rio Grande. You're incredibly good at this. So I guess my question is, what are the tools that you've used to create more community around yourself?
I think you need to find a common goal. As you were saying, the sports team.
Yeah.
Find something that everybody can come together. In my case, it was getting people together to talk about interfaith religion, starting to learn about other religions rather than pretending that my way is the only way. Or you know, Dustin, the food pantry, growing it from a fairly small operation to where today we've provided food to over 500 families.
Yeah, from a casual operation to a pillar in the community that affects almost everyone in the county.
And inviting the people who used to come for a little food before, inviting them to stay and hand food out to the next person. And so that community just grew because they felt that they were helping somebody else. They weren't just on the take.
Sure.
They were there giving.
Yeah, they gained a purpose, right?
So it's finding that common purpose, that common goal. And then inviting people in.
Well, and I think that opens up a fascinating view for veterans. You know, you'll hear about, oh, we're going to have, you know, a meeting at the VA to talk about PTS or, you know, all these, which are great. And I know a lot of veterans who go to those groups and get a lot out of them. I'm not, those are great. But for someone who's feeling isolated to say, come to, like, that can be a lift to try and get them to go. But maybe it's something like, I like baseball and I'm going to go for, you know, or I like, you know, baseball's that's a big thing. I like Warhammer. I'm going to go down to join a Warhammer group and just be able to talk about Warhammer, you know, and just find those small things. You know, we have a line at the end of the movie, like, you know, people think make the world a better place means a little better place than you found it means you have to solve cancer. No. Just incremental things make the world better.
Well, and as you said, Dave, I think that the key is inviting.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going. I'd really like you to come with me.
Yeah. Let's go talk baseball.
You
know?
Absolutely.
Why can't the Mariners DHs get a hit with runners in scoring position this year? I don't know.
Because they changed the weight of the ball and the entire outfield. But I don't want to talk about that.
But yeah, it is. And I think, you know, we all get stuck on grand gestures, grand things, one thing that's going to fix it, one group that's going to fix it. Where if it's the small things, I'm going to go to this little group because I enjoy it.
Getting stuck on those grand gestures gives us an excuse to do nothing. It's bigger than I am, so there's nothing I can do, and that's just bullshit. There is something you can do. There's that guy walking down the street that just needs you to say hi, or that friend who just lost a child or a parent or a sibling, who needs you to just show up and knocking on the door.
Yeah, the small things.
Yep.
Saying, what knocked me for a loop with this movie is we sent the trailer. We didn't even have the movie finished. We just sent the trailer to a friend of my children's godmother, and her husband was in Vietnam, and my wife has known them since high school. And all we knew, Bill's unfortunately passed since now, but Bill was in Vietnam. Bill doesn't talk about it. That's all she knew for all these years. And I kind of got along great with Bill because he's kind of a grump and I'm kind of a grump, and we were together and it was great. But sent the trailer to Margie. She showed it to Bill, woke up the next morning, and I had an essay from Bill, an email talking about how he flew on Chinooks and detailing everything. And I showed it to Carlene, and she's like, Bill's never said a thing to it. And it was kind of one of those, why is there so much dust in the room type moments. But I was talking to Michael Barrett, who's works in Hollywood. His wife, Anna Ferris, is helping us with the movie. I was kind of telling him about it, and he said, well, how does it feel to know that your movie's not even released yet and it's already had more impact than many major blockbusters? And I was like, bullshit, like what? And he's like, no, you'd put something out there, it helped someone, it helped one person. Like, and that moment was like, holy, like, I don't like, and he's like, that's what it takes. Like, you helped one person. Like, you've done something good in this world.
Yeah, it really is the little things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I talked to Margie later about the trailer, and she said Bill's watched it like 9 times.
Yeah,
he goes into the office and he just watches it. And so fortunately he had complications of Agent Orange, that Parkinson's, and passed away a few months ago. But I'm glad he was able. Oh, and then we went over to, my girls were selling Girl Scout cookies at the time. A couple months later, we went over to their house, and Bill was talking to my girls, who were like 9 at the time, or 10, talking to them about Vietnam, and it was a rather amazing thing to see. So we didn't solve cancer, but we did something good.
well, what you're doing with the movie is allowing people to see that they are not alone, and that they don't need to be isolated, that other people have experienced maybe not exactly the same thing, but have the same feeling, the same need to just be with somebody who could understand, even if you never articulate it.
Yeah, we had the Ochoa family on one of our episodes. Charlie was in Vietnam, and his niece and nephew been in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not a lot of commonality between the jungles of Vietnam or the deserts of Afghanistan, or the mountains of Afghanistan, or that's not commonality there, but so much commonality of just the experience of being deployed, of going out beyond the wire. There's so much to talk about across generations, across conflicts, across topography.
The topography is different, but the experience is the same.
Yeah, there's so many bridges that can be gapped.
Absolutely.
Or gaps that can be bridged. Backwards.
Depends on if you're working for the Army or it depends on the goals.
Well, every bridge needs a gap. Every bridge needs a gap to fulfill its purpose. So I want to ask, when we talk about having left the Army to being a civilian, I like to call them oh yeah moments, where I'm 11 years removed from law enforcement, but sometimes I still reach for my left pocket for my credentials and my badge to make sure they're there. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not a cop anymore. Do you have those type of, oh yeah, I'm not in the Army anymore moments?
Not really, because here I get a little bit of that because I'm in the Civil Air Patrol as a search and rescue pilot. So I get to hang out with guys that like airplanes and like the kind of mission that I was flying in Vietnam. So not a lot of oh yeah, other than oh yeah, this isn't a helicopter. I need to get going a little faster.
So Yeah.
Right.
So, Dustin, anything we haven't covered that you had going in?
Not that I can think of at the top of my brain right now. Mike, thanks so much for coming out today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Is there anything else that's come up for you or that you think we should cover?
Nothing jumps out.
All right.
You've been pretty thorough.
Yeah. I will say what I miss from law enforcement is the dark humor. You just can't
Yeah.
match it.
Yeah.
Even Dustin, every once in a while, I'll pop off with something where he'll
Oh
look
my
at me
God.
and like, "You've got issues, Dave." There's a joke. So, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for our audience who stuck with us through to the very end. Always appreciate that. Please make sure to, wherever you're watching or listening, if it be on the podcast channels or on the YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe, tell your friends, tell your enemies if they'll listen. We don't care. A like's a like, a view's a view. But one thing at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit end on the record. Go ahead and stay with us, Mike.
Okay.
See my Zoom face of all these little widgets, which is the one I want. One time I couldn't find it and I saw end and I hit it and I just exited everyone.
You've been
out.
listening to the Know Their Story podcast. If you made it this far, we must be doing something right. Let us know by subscribing to our channel.
And think about sitting down with the veterans in your life, because saying thank you for your service should be the beginning of the conversation, not the end.